I felt angry because, like I said, you knew what you did, and for you to reach out, it's like, what are you trying to cover? You thought that you were going to get away with killing my sister?
Mariah Griffin says her sister Remy and Adeline Atongwa were together about 4 years. And the night she found out Remy had been killed, Mariah said Atongwa needed to know as soon as possible. The news of Atongwa's arrest reached Mariah today as she and her mom were on their way to a custody hearing for Remy's daughter.
For 13 hours, a baby cried in apartment 4B on Unbridge Drive. Neighbors heard the wails through paper-thin walls but didn't knock, didn't call, didn't check. By 4:32 p.m. on February 9, 2024, when Baldwin Borough Police finally pushed through that door, they found 1-year-old Harmony Dior in a soiled diaper, dehydrated and alone, except for the body of her mother lying in the next room. Ramaya Griffin was just 20 years old. The medical examiner would later count 12 bullet wounds. 12. Each one fired while her baby daughter slept nearby. Welcome to our channel. If you are new here, hit that subscribe button, like and share this video to help raise awareness and spread caution. But that's not the most disturbing part of this story. 1 week later, as 200 mourners gathered at Stowe Rocks High School to remember the young mother with the infectious smile, a man slipped quietly into the back row. He kept his head down, didn't speak to anyone, just watched. That man was Adeline Itangwe, the father of Ramaya's child, the same man who, according to police, put 12 bullets into her body, left their baby alone with her corpse, and then had the cold-blooded audacity to show up at her funeral. Kept to himself, he sat down and didn't say anything, Ramaya's sister Mariah would later recall, the memory now tainted with horror. She had no idea she was sharing that sacred space of grief with the very person who caused it. What kind of person murders someone, then shows up to watch their family mourn? What goes through a killer's mind as they sit among the devastated loved ones, listening to stories about the life they stole? Baldwin Borough isn't known for violence. It's a quiet community in Pennsylvania where neighbors might not know each other well, but they certainly don't expect to hear gunshots at 3 a.m. They don't expect to learn that a young mother was executed while her baby slept just feet away. And they definitely don't expect the killer to be so brazen that he'd return to the scene. Not of the crime, but of its aftermath. This isn't just a story about murder. It's about calculation, about a facade so convincing that even after Ramaya Griffin was found with 12 bullets in her body, no one suspected the man who sat among them at her memorial. The man who, just days earlier, had reportedly stolen a license plate to cover his tracks. The man who left his own daughter alone with her dead mother for over 13 hours. The man who, until February 21, 2024, almost got away with it. This is the story of Ramaya Griffin's final days and the shocking betrayal that ended them. Before she became a headline, before her name was spoken in hushed tones across Baldwin Borough, Ramaya Remy Griffin was the girl with the smile that lit up rooms. Any room that she walked into, all you saw from her was her big, bright smile, her sister Maria told reporters, her voice breaking. She was always smiling. She had so many friends. At just 20 years old, Ramaya had already graduated from Stowe Rocks High School in Pittsburgh. The same football field where she once celebrated milestones became the gathering place for her vigil. 200 people huddled together under the night sky, holding candles that couldn't possibly burn as bright as Remy once did. Her grandmother, Brenda Darrell, had called her "my little chubby cheeks" for 2 decades. A nickname born in infancy that stuck through childhood, through teenage years, through motherhood. A constant reminder of the baby she once was, even as she raised her own. Who would want to do something to her and take her life? Mariah asked at the vigil, her question hanging in the air unanswered. It just doesn't make any sense. We don't understand. The sisters were just 2 years apart. Mariah 22, Ramaya 20. But their bond transcended age. Best friend was how Mariah described her. Not just sister, best friend. A year before her death, Ramaya had given birth to Harmony Dior. The little girl had just celebrated her first birthday, a milestone that would become painfully significant, the only birthday her mother would ever witness. Photos show Ramaya beaming with her daughter, their matching smiles unmistakable. She balanced the demands of young motherhood without losing the spark that made her Remy. She planned for a future that stretched decades ahead. College, maybe. A career. Watching Harmony grow. Look at the turnout. This was Remy. This is what she was, her Aunt Tamra Guyton said at the memorial, gesturing to the crowd that spilled across the football field. Former classmates, childhood friends, teachers, neighbors, all struggling to process how someone so vibrant could be gone so suddenly. The community rallied immediately. A GoFundMe for Harmony's future, offers of childcare, meals dropped off at the family's home. The outpouring reflected not just sympathy for a tragic death, but genuine love for a young woman who had touched countless lives in her brief 20 years. She was amazing, one friend wrote online. Creative, added another. Beautiful, talented, nurturing. The tributes poured in, each one painting another stroke in the portrait of a life cut brutally short. But as her family gathered her belongings from the apartment where she died, they found evidence of another Ramaya, one they hadn't fully known. Text messages that hinted at tension, photos that told stories of complicated relationships, and questions about the man who fathered her child. What happens behind closed doors really don't get spoken of much, Mariah would later admit. The public, Ramaya, the one with the infectious laugh and boundless energy, might have been hiding private struggles that only emerged after her death. On the night of the vigil, as hundreds of mourners released balloons into the sky above Stowe Rocks High School, Mariah made a vow about her niece. That's my child now. I'm going to take care of her, and I'm going to make sure that she's okay, and I'm going to make sure that she remembers her mom. It was a promise born of love and rage and grief, a determination that Harmony would know the mother who now existed only in photos and stories and the memories of those who loved her. As the crowd dispersed that night, returning to homes where Ramaya would never again visit, no one noticed the quiet man who had slipped away early. No one paid attention to Adeline Etangwa as he left the memorial for the woman whose blood was, metaphorically if not literally, still on his hands. The community mourned a daughter, a sister, a friend, a mother, unaware that they had just shared that sacred space with her killer. And as police pieced together surveillance footage and witness statements, as they followed the trail that would eventually lead to Adeline's door, Ramaya's family clung to memories of her smile, the one thing even 12 bullets couldn't take away. Ramaya met Adeline Etangwa when she was just 16. For 4 years, they built what looked like a normal relationship from the outside, young love with its typical ups and downs. When Harmony arrived, friends posted congratulations. Family welcomed Adeline into their homes. The perfect picture of a young family finding their way. But something changed after the baby's birth. They were co-parenting, Mariah explained, her voice flat. The romantic relationship had ended, but Adeline remained in Ramaya's life, unavoidably connected through their daughter. On weekends, he'd pick up Harmony. On holidays, he'd appear at family gatherings. At birthday celebrations, he'd sit at the table like nothing was wrong. We treated him like family, Mariah recalled. He was at the family dinners, and any time there was a birthday, he was there. But beneath this performance of civility, Mariah saw warning signs. She described Adeline as controlling and shady, words that took on horrific new meaning after February 9th. What happens behind closed doors really don't get spoken of much, she admitted. But there were some things that I've heard and, it kind of raised an eyebrow. What were those things? The text messages demanding to know Ramaya's whereabouts? The fights that neighbors overheard? The subtle ways he undermined her confidence? Ramaya doesn't elaborate, perhaps because the pain is too raw, or perhaps because she now questions whether speaking up sooner might have changed things. For Ramaya's part, she maintained the peace. She invited Adeline to family events for harmony's sake. She coordinated schedules. She navigated the complex terrain of raising a child with someone she no longer loved but couldn't fully escape. She still had love for him, Mariah acknowledged. Not romantic love, but the complicated affection that comes from sharing a child, a history, years of your life with someone. That's what makes domestic violence so insidious. It hides behind smiles at birthday parties. It lurks beneath polite conversations at family dinners. It wears the mask of co-parenting while plotting something far worse. Drop in the comments if you've ever seen someone hiding their true nature from a family. How many red flags did people miss before it was too late? February 9th, 2024 started like any other winter night in Baldwin Borough. Quiet streets. Lights going out one by one as residents turned in. By 3 a.m., the apartment complex on Unbridge Drive was silent, except for apartment 4B. That's when neighbors heard what some would later describe as popping sounds. Not loud enough to cause alarm, not distinct enough to immediately register as gunshots, just unusual noises in the night that were easy to dismiss and quick to forget. Inside apartment 4B, those sounds marked the end of Ramaya Griffin's life. 12 bullets tore through her body as she lay in bed. 12 separate pulls of the trigger. Not a moment of rage, a methodical execution. In the next room, 1-year-old Harmony slept, somehow undisturbed by the violence, just feet away. When she woke hours later, her mother wouldn't respond to her cries. For 13 hours, that baby girl remained alone in the apartment with her mother's body. 13 hours of crying, of hunger, of a soiled diaper that no one came to change. 13 hours where neighbors heard wails through the walls but didn't intervene. At 4:32 p.m., over 13 hours after those popping sounds, Baldwin Borough Police finally responded to a report of a shooting. What they found was a scene that left even experienced officers shaken. Ramaya, dead from multiple gunshot wounds. Her baby dehydrated but physically unharmed. And evidence that didn't add up. None of it is making sense, officers were overheard saying at the scene. It doesn't add up, it doesn't add up, nothing is making sense. The ground floor apartment had a busted screen on the windows suggesting a break-in, but nothing was stolen. The door was locked from the inside, and who breaks into an apartment at 3 a.m., executes a sleeping mother with 12 bullets, then leaves her baby untouched? Someone who knew exactly who they wanted to hurt. Someone with a key. Someone who knew the layout of the apartment intimately enough to navigate it in the dark. Someone like Ellen Atangwa. But the most disturbing question isn't how the killer got in. It's what kind of person leaves their own child alone with their mother's body for 13 hours. What kind of calculation leads someone to commit murder, then abandon their baby to potential dehydration, hunger, or worse? And how did no one in the apartment complex connect the unusual sounds in the night with the crying baby the next day? How did a community miss the signs that something was catastrophically wrong behind that door? In the days that followed, as news of the murder spread through Baldwin Borough, neighbors avoided each other's eyes. No one wanted to admit they'd heard the baby crying. No one wanted to acknowledge they could have intervened hours earlier. No one wanted to face the collective failure to protect a young mother and her child. Would you notice if your neighbor's baby was crying for hours? Would you knock on the door, call the landlord, alert authorities? Or would you, like the residents of Unbridge Drive, turn up your TV, tell yourself it's not your business, and try to ignore the nagging feeling that something isn't right? Hit subscribe and tell us below, because next time, your attention might be the difference between life and death. The crime scene in Baldwin Borough left police with more questions than answers. 12 shots, a busted window screen, a baby left alone for hours. Nothing about it fit the pattern of a random break-in. Detectives from the Allegheny County Homicide Unit got to work, determined to find out who could have done something so cold. They started with the basics: witness interviews, canvassing the neighborhood, and pulling any available surveillance video from the area. The footage didn't show a masked stranger slipping through the shadows. Instead, it revealed something far more calculated. Detectives noticed a car parked near Ramaya's apartment in the early hours of February 9th. The vehicle's license plate didn't match any of the residents. When they ran the plate, it came back as stolen from a friend of Adeline Itangwa. That detail set off alarms. Why would someone swap plates unless they were trying to hide their tracks? As they dug deeper, more pieces started to fall into place. Adeline had access to Ramaya's apartment. He knew her routines. He knew when she'd be home, when the baby would be asleep, and how to get in without drawing attention. The busted window screen? A distraction, maybe. Or a failed attempt to stage the scene as a break-in, but the most chilling detail wasn't found in the evidence. It was in the aftermath. While detectives were still piecing together the timeline, Adeline did something that would haunt Ramaya's family forever. He showed up at her funeral. 200 people gathered at Stowe Rocks High School to mourn Ramaya. Friends, family, teachers, neighbors, all united in grief. And there, sitting quietly in the crowd, was Adeline. The man who, according to police, had just taken Ramaya's life. He kept to himself, he sat down, and didn't say anything, Mariah remembered. At the time, she thought he was just grieving in his own way. Now she sees it differently. He wanted us to find her like that. He wanted us to find my niece soiled in her diaper and my sister lifeless on her bed. The audacity of it. Attending the funeral, watching the pain he'd caused, blending in with the mourners, was almost as shocking as the crime itself. It was a move that spoke to a level of calculation few could comprehend. Detectives continued to build their case. They gathered phone records, tracked Adeline's movements, and collected statements from those who knew the couple. The evidence mounted, and the picture became clear. This wasn't a crime of passion. It was planned. It was personal. On February 21st, nearly 2 weeks after Ramaya's murder, police made their move. Mariah and her mother were on their way to a custody hearing for Harmony when they got the call. Adeline had been arrested. The charges, criminal homicide and endangering the welfare of a child. For Ramaya's family, the arrest brought a strange mix of relief and rage. Relief that the person responsible was finally behind bars. Rage that he'd been so close, so involved, so present in their grief, all while hiding the truth. The community struggled to process it. How could someone sit among the people he just shattered? How could he look Mariah in the eye, knowing what he'd done? Have you ever been in the same room as someone who was hiding something terrible? Maybe it was a secret, a lie, or something much darker. Drop your story in the comments, because sometimes the most dangerous people are the ones who know exactly how to blend in. As the investigation wrapped up, one thing was clear. Adeline Itangwa had gone to great lengths to cover his tracks, but in the end the truth caught up with him. And for Ramaya's family, the search for justice was just beginning. When Mariah Griffin learned that Adeline Itangwa had been arrested for her sister's murder, the shock gave way to a white-hot rage that still burns in her voice. In the calculation of it all, the stolen license plate, the 3 a.m. timing, the funeral appearance, pointed to something beyond a moment of violence. This was planned, this was deliberate. This was a man who not only took Ramaya's life, but orchestrated how her body would be discovered and by whom. For Mariah, the focus quickly shifted to the tiny survivor of this tragedy, 1-year-old Harmony Dior, the baby who spent 13 hours alone with her mother's body, the baby who would grow up with no memory of Ramaya's infectious smile or boundless energy. "That's my third child. That's my child now," Mariah declared with fierce determination. "I'm going to make sure that she remembers her mom. We're going to keep her memory alive." The custody situation became an immediate priority. On the very day of Adeline's arrest, Mariah and her mother were headed to a custody hearing. With Adeline behind bars facing homicide charges, the legal path became clearer. But the emotional journey was just beginning. A GoFundMe sprang up overnight, with hundreds of donations pouring in for Harmony's future. The money would help with immediate needs, diapers, formula, childcare, but also with long-term concerns like therapy, education, and creating a stable home for a child whose world had been shattered before she could even understand it. The Baldwin Borough community, initially shocked by the violence in their quiet neighborhood, rallied around Ramaya's family. Meals appeared on doorsteps. Childcare offers flooded in. Neighbors who had never met Ramaya showed up at the vigil, determined to show that her life mattered to them, even in death. But beneath the support and solidarity, questions lingered, questions that may never be fully answered. Why did Adeline kill Ramaya? Was it about control? Jealousy? Had there been threats before? Could anyone have seen this coming? Why did he leave his own daughter in such danger? Was it callousness? Or did he assume someone would check on them sooner? And perhaps most disturbing, what was going through his mind as he sat at that funeral, watching Ramaya's family grieve, knowing exactly what he had done? As Adeline awaits trial, these questions hang over Baldwin Borough like a shadow. For Maria, the answers matter less than the reality she now faces, raising her sister's daughter, preserving Ramaya's memory, and somehow finding a path forward through unimaginable grief. "We have part of our justice," Mariah said after the arrest. "But we didn't get all of it yet. Justice might come through the courts, but healing? That's a much longer road. One that Mariah, Harmony, and the entire Griffin family are just beginning to walk." Looking back, the signs were there, hidden in plain sight. Maria described Adeline as controlling and shady, words that seem almost prophetic now. But how do you distinguish between a difficult ex and a potential killer? Experts point to the post-separation period as the most dangerous time in abusive relationships. When an abuser loses control over their partner, violence can escalate rapidly. For Ramaya and Adeline, the co-parenting arrangement kept them connected despite their romantic separation, a common scenario that can mask growing danger. The calculated nature of the crime, from the stolen license plate to the timing of the attack, suggests this wasn't a spontaneous act but a planned execution. Friends and family should watch for this kind of methodical behavior, the quiet planning that precedes violence. Could anyone have prevented Ramaya's murder? It's the question that haunts her family. Were there conversations that never happened, warnings that went unheeded, resources that might have helped? And what about that final twisted act, attending her funeral? Was it to maintain his cover, to witness the pain he'd caused, or something more disturbing? A need to insert himself into the narrative? To control Ramaya's story even after her death? Some questions have no satisfying answers. Armani Dior will grow up knowing her mother only through photos and stories, the bright smile, the infectious laugh, the 20 years of life that ended far too soon. "I'm going to make sure that she remembers her mom," Mariah vowed, a promise that will shape both their lives forever. As Baldwin Borough continues to mourn, as Adeline Etangwa sits in jail awaiting trial, we're left wondering what went through his mind as he watched Ramaya's family grieve. Did he feel guilt? Was he making sure no one suspected him? Or was he there for a much darker reason? Watch for the warning signs. Speak up. Act. Because sometimes the difference between life and death is someone paying attention.